Today we're going to talk about the Vanderbilts, once the richest family in America. The family who had it all and lost everything in the blink of an eye. The epitome of, we have too much money and we don't know what the hell to do with it. They begged, borrowed and stole their way to the top. Sort of like the American dream in overdrive. But despite having as much money as a Roman emperor, okay, I may be exaggerating for dramatic effect, but you get the idea. Within a few generations they'd spent the lot, like Harry and Ron and the Hogwarts Express. The Vanderbilts aren't so much a story, they're an American cautionary tale for the ages. Like all great dynasties, the Vanderbilts didn't just appear out of nowhere. It started way back in the early 17th century, when Jan Ertszoon decided to pack up his belongings, and probably a lot of blind optimism, and head west to New Amsterdam as an indentured servant, hoping for a better life. An indentured servant? Talk about aiming high, Jan. Picture it sort of like a low-budget Jason and the Argonauts. He set sail not in search of the Golden Fleece, but for the chance that his descendants might one day fleece an entire nation. And fleece an entire nation is putting it a little mildly, as we'll soon find out. Because let's be honest, nothing screams, I'm going to build an empire, quite like a boatload of seasick Dutch farmers, sacks in hand, staggering into the New World, leaving their old lives as farmers in the Netherlands behind them, making it to America and fulfilling their dreams as farmers. Right. Little did poor Jan know, he was laying the roots for one of the most powerful and richest families America's ever seen. So let's fast forward a century to Cornelius Vanderbilt, known as the Commodore, a nickname he was given during his time as a Staten Island ferryman. Well, it's a lot nicer than some of the nicknames I've been given. Despite having no formal education, he would become one of America's leading industrialists. But he didn't exactly start from nothing, and like every nepo baby to come after him, he walked so they could run, getting just a teensy loan of $100 from his mother so he could start his own ferry business.
My father gave me a small loan of $1 million.
Clearly from humble beginnings, with his loan, he purchased a small ferry boat in New York Harbour and was soon commanding the ferry lanes between Staten Island and Manhattan. And here's a funny coincidence. He was allegedly related through his mother to a Dutch pirate king, who literally formed and ran his own pirate kingdom, the Republic of Salé. So whilst he was out there stealing ships, ruling the seven seas, going to Tortuga with Jack Sparrow and having a pint or two, whilst little Cornelius was out in the Hudson Bay, ferrying people around like a glorified 18th century Uber driver. So not quite the Commodore yet, are you? But this would change. He may have started as a sea taxi, but he would go on to control much of the United States transport infrastructure. So maybe the Commodore nickname is fair. And like good old Jan Ertszoon, Cornelius also had a dream, but in Cornelius's case, it was continental domination. And how did the Commodore do it, you may ask? Well, he stalked every struggling local line, offering deals too good to refuse, and when they accepted, he slashed the freight rate so low that his rivals folded in something called rate wars. What a lovely man he was growing up to be. With a war chest plundered from his steamship exploits, he acquired the Harlem Railroad and the New York Central, merged them into the New York Central and Hudson River Railroad in 1869, and left every competitor in the dust. You know, after pushing them over and kicking dirt in their eyes. He even managed to grease enough political palms to get state land grants, because America was desperately trying to improve its infrastructure. And by 1870, he owned 4,500 miles of railroads, with each rail serving as a literal cash point for him, making him seriously rich. He was wildly successful, bullying and coercing his way to national supremacy over his rivals. He built railroads, steamship lines, and eventually dynasties, destroying all of his rivals along the way. He'd become the fat controller of his East American railroad empire, an inspiration to all corporate bullies out there. The first acclaimed robber baron in American history, achieving this title in the New York Times in 1859. Another great accolade to his fame. Unlike Carnegie and Rockefeller, who donated loads of their money to good causes, Cornelius thought that was uncool and lame, and thought it was more important to protect his family's wealth, kind of like a reverse Robin Hood, steal from the poor to give to the rich, and in this case, his rich family. But lo and behold, at the ripe old age of 82, the Commodore finally passed away. As the richest man in America, with a wealth of $100 million at the time, which was crazy money. He left the majority of his wealth to his son, William Vanderbilt, whom he thought was a bit slow, and even referred to him as a blockhead. What a lovely father. And the rest of it went to other family members, but mere breadcrumbs by comparison. As you can imagine, this did not sit well, and one of William's brothers even sued him over this. Because of course he did. Because when blood and money was involved in the 19th century, it always ended in litigation. It's like the famous 19th century saying, when blood and money is involved, there's always litigation. You know, that famous saying. Right? Hello? Ignoring all the background noise and fawning relatives.
Oh, William, give me some money, please. It's not fair. I want some.
Incredibly, William took his father's fortune and doubled it within a decade. So put some respect on his name, Cornelius. Not really a blockhead, is he? The man formerly known as Blockhead William by his own father was able to do this by reducing the costs of the family railroad business, as well as improving its efficiency. And with lots of safe investments on the side, not only did William maintain the family fortune, but made it absurdly big. And unlike his father, William was a little bit more generous with his money, throwing a $1 million bone to found the Vanderbilt University, showing that he could be generous as long as it was on his own terms. It all seemed to be going so well. And then came the quote. In 1882, a journalist asked whether the railroads should temper profits to serve the public interest. William didn't take this very well and snapped, "The public be damned!" Is that what he sounded like? Does anyone sound like that? Do I sound like that? Anyway, he later claimed the line was taken out of context. Not so sure about that one. He said he was targeting money-losing branch lines, not everyday travellers. But naturally, small-town papers, congressmen and reformers howled anyway. The New York Herald splashed it in giant headlines, predicting it would outlast any epitaph. Ooh, burn. This one outburst did more than just create some good headlines. It even helped spur the creation of the Interstate Commerce Commission in 1887, who did things like regulate railroads and ensure that rates were fair. So good for the public, but not so good for the Vanderbilts, particularly William. But despite his little PR campaign, it was clear that William wasn't here to play nice. His goals were to make profits, crush competition, and remind the public they weren't so much people, they were numbers, adding to his already enormous fortune. William, like his father, knew that profit was king, and any business acting to the contrary wouldn't last very long. Either that or the Vanderbilts would come swooping in and make them bankrupt. Anyway, that's none of my business. But under William, the Vanderbilts were at the top of their game. So naturally, William died. What? You thought this was going to have a happy ending? Welcome to the real world, love. Yes, I'm afraid William passed away 7 years after his father in 1885. So as Cornelius represented the rise of the Vanderbilt family, William represented its peak. He was kind of like the family's Emperor Trajan, but with his death, the decay started to show. And whilst they were at the top, the only way was down. Most of the money went to Cornelius Vanderbilt II, William's eldest son. He was somewhat of a favourite of Cornelius Vanderbilt I. Are we calling him that now? We'll call him the Commodore. He saw a lot of his younger self in his grandson, and probably loved the fact that he was named after him. But unlike his father and grandfather, Cornelius Vanderbilt II donated far more money towards good causes than they did, but still falling way short for what was expected for people as rich as him. But you know, Vanderbilts, they be Vanderbilts. Oh God. But to be fair to him, between the Sherman Antitrust Act and the 1893 crash, the railroads weren't the money-making machines they used to be. So maybe he thought he'd just do some good with it instead. But the rest of the family, well, let's just say they had other ideas. The rest of the Vanderbilt rabble, a plucky bunch, if by plucky you mean burdened with the tragic fate of inheriting a multi-million-dollar trust fund. Born not with silver, oh no, but with diamond spoons in their mouths. Unbothered with protecting the family's wealth, the rest of the Vanderbilts got together and said, hey, let's do some good with this money. Let's try and make the world a better place. Oh wait, no they didn't. What they did instead was decided to spend all their money on building these absurd castles across America. All their houses had the finest trappings of a French chateau, kind of like a living museum of decadence, and ironically, stood proudly in a country that 100 years before stared King George III in the face and said, "You're no longer welcome in America. Now get out." But it didn't stop there. In their lavish mansions, they hosted lavish guests and lavish parties, where people were dressed like it was the court of Versailles, and even Marie Antoinette herself was there, because that story ended well. Even the New York press was in attendance, previewing the home and reporting from the inside, like their very own personal TMZ. Talk about keeping up with the Vanderbilts. All of this was done, as usual, in pursuit of social status. They may have been rich, but they were new money. And this did have consequences. Not the kind of consequences that the millions of struggling families were going through. You know, trying to clothe themselves, get some food, maybe a roof over their heads. But in the circles that the Vanderbilts were trying to get into, being new money was a big no-no. And nothing shows this better than when the Vanderbilts were left out of Lady Astor's fabled 400, a list of Manhattan's top socialites. But the Vanderbilts wouldn't go down quietly, because of course they wouldn't. They spared no expense throwing a party at their Fifth Avenue mansion that cost $7.3 million in today's money. 7.3. And lo and behold, they got on the list. Hooray for them! This was a family that threw around cash like it was going out of fashion. Unfortunately again, not in the direction of the struggling families across America. Anyway, and really, the Astor 400 is like the 300 Spartans at the Battle of Thermopylae, but instead of holding back the Persian Empire, they were just holding off the nouveau riche. Honestly, I know which battle I would rather fight. Probably the Astor 400. Bit safer, isn't it? Yeah. But like the Ancien regime they so emulated, this excess and hedonism was a foreshadowing to their unfortunate decline. Whoever said money can't buy class and style? Well, they clearly hadn't met the Vanderbilts. Well, that didn't stop them from trying. Enter Consuelo Vanderbilt, daughter of Alva Vanderbilt, the dollar princess in chief. The unwilling pawn in one of the most infamous transatlantic social trades in the Gilded Age. The Vanderbilt's ticket into European aristocracy. A union of the old and new world high societies. But as we'll find out, it sounds a lot more romantic and glamorous than it actually was for Consuelo. Nevertheless, it was a feat that all nouveau riche families desired. Where during this time, a whopping 454 American heiresses were marrying into European aristocracy, including a third of the British House of Lords.
Oh, behave. Yeah.
Consuelo was married off to Charles Spencer Churchill, the 9th Duke of Marlborough, first cousin and close friend to Winston Churchill, in 1895. The marriage had all the trappings and warmth of a business merger, and none of the love and romance. It makes your heart melt. And like a high-value hostage, being handed over with a dowry of millions, she even cried on her wedding day. Something tells me it was not tears of joy. The Duke was in dire need of money. His ancestral home Blenheim Palace was falling to pieces, and he was getting desperate. Consuelo wasn't there to be the Duke's loving companion. No, of course not, that would be silly. She was really there to patch the leaky roofs. And shock horror, you may want to sit down for this, the marriage didn't last. Well, firstly, Consuelo's true love was still in the New World, but that didn't matter to the Vanderbilts. But after mothering 2 children with the Duke, they separated, and she remarried years later. She went on to become a vocal advocate for women's rights, making her one of the few Vanderbilts to trade social climbing for actual impact and following her heart. You go, Queen. Did I pull that off? I feel like I pulled that off. Comment below, did I pull that off? They may have cracked high society, but by the early 1900s, the shine was wearing off. Without a clear figurehead to steer the ship, the family was drifting apart, and their mansions were falling piece by gilded piece. And just 48 years after its construction, the great Vanderbilt mansion on Fifth Avenue, once the grandest private home in America, was sold for demolition. Alice Vanderbilt, widow of Cornelius II, offloaded the furniture and art, and even allowed gawking tourists into the house for 50 cents a pop. A once mighty dynasty reduced to a house tour and a garage sale. And just as the guillotine was used to end the aristocracy in France, in New York, the wrecking ball was the razor of choice. But do you want to know the real death rattle of the Vanderbilts? Well, look no further than the Biltmore estate. I mean, have you seen that thing? It's like The Great Gatsby, or using the infinite money cheat on Sims when no one's looking. It's a 250-room mansion in North Carolina, built by George Washington Vanderbilt II, the guy who looked at a mountain and said, "I want a castle there." But the difference is, he actually built one. And like every Vanderbilt before him, he filled it with an army of servants, too much art to shake a stick at, and God knows how much mahogany. Too much mahogany, believe me. It was the architectural version of saying, "I have no idea what money is anymore." When he heard someone say Biltmore, he must have mistakenly heard them say build more, and that's why he built this absurd mansion. Biltmore. Build more. Worst joke of the video? Definitely the worst joke of the video. But he wasn't the only one. They were all at it, building multiple mansions in New York, in Asheville, in Newport. When they heard the name Newport, I'm surprised they didn't decide to build themselves their own bloody armada for God's sake. Even worse than the Biltmore joke? Yeah, it's definitely up there. Whilst monopolies were being broken up, industries collapsing, and millions of everyday Americans struggling to survive, the Vanderbilts were deciding which wallpaper looked best in their new parlour suite. The point is, America was moving in a new direction, and the Vanderbilts were at risk of being left behind. You're probably wondering, how does a family that seemingly owned everything lose most of their money and influence? It's the classic aristocratic story. You build an empire, your children enjoy, and your grandchildren, well, they light it on fire trying to impress their friends in Paris. I mean, we've all been there. Anyway, moving on. Now let's talk about Gloria, the triad of the century herself. Gloria Vanderbilt, daughter of Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt. I mean, seriously, who names these people? Who sadly passed away when Gloria is only 1 year old. Oh, I feel a bit bad now for my previous comment. Moving on swiftly. And because of this, Gloria's mother was left as her sole legal guardian. But fast forward 9 years, and accusations of neglect and poor parenting were thrown at Gloria's mother. And in true Vanderbilt fashion, court cases soon followed. Enter Aunt Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, who believed Gloria's mother was unfit to raise her, so sued her for custody, arguing Gloria needed a guardian more focused on actual guardianship than glamorous gallivanting. Ooh, what a surprise, who'd have thought? Gertrude won. What a surprise. Gloria's mother was granted only limited visitation rights as a result. But that wasn't all for poor Gloria. Not only did she effectively lose both her parents at such a young age, she was caught in the glare of a horrible public trial. Her childhood turned into public theatre, and she was very nearly the victim of a kidnapping plot that was luckily foiled at the last minute. But that wasn't the end of the story. New York's very own Return of the King, the last of the line of Manhattan kings returning at the turn of the tide. Everyone, a big hand to Ian McKellen for coming to feature on this video. Thanks Ian, see you later. Jesus. A name once synonymous with railroads and power, returned in the form of moderately priced stretched jeans. To be fair, she became a cultural icon in her own right, with her trousers being sold in department stores besides the likes of Calvin Klein and Tommy Hilfiger. Not her trousers, I mean the trousers that her company designed and made. From railroads of the Gilded Age to department store denim. What a ride, if you pardon the pun, in a line of terrible, terrible puns. And last but not least, we get to the final boss of the Vanderbilt story. None other than Anderson Cooper, CNN correspondent, and let's face it, an absolute silver fox, and has the great accolade of being one of the few in the family who's earned an honest living with an actual real job. Yes, he did inherit $1.5 million from his mother, but that was small by Vanderbilt standards. And despite growing up in privilege, he saw money being lost all around him. However, he has since amassed a multi-million-dollar fortune in his own right, and has even stated that he doesn't believe inheriting money, thinking it a curse. I wonder where he got that idea from. And let's face it, he's right, because where are the Vanderbilts now? Footnotes, tour guides, heritage brands. You go to the Biltmore and buy a Vanderbilt wine and maybe a little soap from the gift shop. It's the equivalent of visiting Caesar's Palace in Vegas and thinking, yeah, the Roman Empire's doing great, I don't know what everyone's talking about. The Vanderbilts are the original new money influencers, flexing before Instagram, building actual castles just to prove that they could. But here's the final punchline. We love this kind of story. People rising from nothing, only for them to fall down further, and for all of us at the bottom to laugh at them as they join us. The Vanderbilts went from titans of industry to trivia questions. It's a metaphor that transcends time and place. Big dreams, massive success, unchecked hubris, and then an inevitable crash. But with a gift shop at the end. So what's the takeaway? I'll tell you what it should be. Never give your kids anything. Let them suffer. Make them eat struggle for breakfast, because otherwise they're going to end up with a 200-room mansion and no money for plumbing. Think of the smell. This is how generational wealth really dies. Not with a bang, but with a brunch. So thank you Vanderbilts for the lesson. Build the trains, ride the trains, don't turn the trains into legacy museums. And maybe next time, instead of the costume ball, invest in mutual funds, you stupid Oh, what a journey. If you enjoyed that video, we've got some even better ones on the way.
No we don't, he's lying!
No I'm not, I promise, we do have better videos on the way, so like and subscribe.
Go on, do it,